Night settled over Coruscant, like a velvet lens, grinding the city's edges smooth. The towers softened to silhouettes, and the skylanes turned to beads of white and red, drifting on invisible strings between spires that had always seemed more permanent than law, than custom, than any oath spoken inside the dome chamber at their heart. The planet breathed in layers, the slow thunder of maglev trunks, the insistent rasp of ventilation vanes, the far insectile chorus of service drones. It had its own climate of sound, and on that sound, Mothma could measure her courage. She stood at the window of her apartment and watched the lights flicker on the Senate dome. A crisp seam of blue circled its crown as a maintenance array clicked into place. Blue, the color of calm. Blue, the Republic's old hue. Fresh paint over a name that had already been filed to a different shape. In the reflection, her face looked narrower than she remembered, and younger, which was not how senatorial life usually worked. Perhaps it was the way her hair had been braided for the late session, or the way fatigue had bleached the fire from her features. She tried to imagine the chamber tomorrow, that great dish of stone and light where the Emperor sat, where Masameda's staff marked the hammering of procedure like a metronome. "Mon," Perrin said from the doorway. His voice carried the cultured ease of Chandrila's better salons, the kind that had turned their courtyards into music, and always made sure the leaves were swept before guests arrived. "You've not eaten." She turned. His shirt was open at the throat, that faintly scandalous affectation he favored for private gatherings. The guests had gone, the laughter and hollow pleasantries carried off by service droids into silent hallways. The house felt larger when it was empty, like a ship after the crew disembarked. "I wasn't hungry," she said. "Too much talking." He watched her a moment, weighing whether to step closer. Masameda looked satisfied. That means he has a list of names to feed to the Emperor in the morning. His lists grow longer every day. She moved from the window, the city flattening to a smear behind her. "He believes that makes him tall." "Mon." Perrin gestured, helpless for once, toward the quiet rooms. The guests were worried. "They say your tone in the chamber is sharper. You're not known for sharp." "In the chamber, I'm heard." She reached for the clasp that kept her sash in place and found her hand steadier than she expected. The sash fell, scarlet on cream, a bright wound on snow. How many were worried, and how many were eager to be invited to something dangerous, without having to be brave? He smiled despite himself. "Is there a difference?" "Yes," she said. "And it will become clearer by the hour." He crossed the room and took the sash from the floor, folding it the way he would fold a napkin, as if order could be coaxed back into the world by habit. "I know you, Mon. I know when you've decided something." He hesitated. "Don't decide it yet." She thought of Chandrila. Not as the tourists remembered it, with perfect fields and placid lakes in official hollows, but as she remembered it when she was a girl. Wet wind off the river? Awe-struck silence under early stars, the way the schoolhouse smelled of chalk and damp wool when it rained. The first oath she had taken had not been in any chamber. It had been standing on a footbridge, hands on the railing, promising to give back more than she took, because everything living breathed together or not, at all. "I'll not survive indecision," she said. "No one will." He looked past her to the city again. "Bale will talk you down. Bale will ask me to wait." He is not wrong to ask. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. She could feel the edge of his wedding band press into her palm. But the moment will not wait. It's here. It's in the sound of this city, and the way the Senate guards stand now. Feet apart, hands nearer their blasters. It's in the way people laugh too loudly in my living room, and then glance at the door. Everyone is testing the air. Perrin's fingers tightened and then let go. He was not a coward, not in the small personal way. He could be braver than she was about many things. But this was a different balance. This was choosing whether. "Then, if you've decided, at least tell me how to keep you alive." She thought of all the ways to die on Coruscant. Quiet, clean, lifted out of a traffic flow by a patrol and never returned. Noisy, messy, a speeder burst against a pylon. Theatrical, under a single light in a dark room with a camera running. It was almost a comfort to consider them, to shrink them to shapes that could be counted. "Keep my daughter asleep when the knocking comes," she said. "And if you must lie, lie with conviction, for her sake and the servants'. Mon." "It will not be tonight," she said. "But do keep her asleep." He nodded. She went to kiss his cheek, and the motion felt, suddenly, like a farewell. He must have felt it too, because he stepped away and turned it into a gesture of courtesy, opening the door to her study as if she had asked it. He could smooth anything. It had been one of the first things she loved. Her study was small, a deliberate modesty in a world that equated size with seriousness. The desk was a narrow stripe of dark wood, old Chandralen grain she had smuggled in a lifetime ago. She let her hands rest on it a moment, and felt the coolness of the lacquer, remembering the way her father's hand had been warm and spotted when he taught her to write statecraft letters, short, courteous, precise. Politics was an art of finding the sentence that could carry the most weight without creaking. She drew out a blank data slate and laid it flat. The first words were always the hardest. The declaration had to be more than a complaint. It had to be a door. Chandrila, she thought, and then she set it aside. This was larger than one world, even if the voice would be hers. She wrote as if speaking to someone who loved everything in the galaxy that could be loved. To the child watching freighters lift. To the dockhand who had learned the names of ships by touch. To the archivist who was the last living person who remembered a law that had been erased and knew it by heart. Citizens of the galaxy. She paused, listening to the words settle. Too formal. Too large. Not yet human. She erased it and wrote again. Neighbors. And the word opened something. A long view of fields, and an unalarmed voice calling across them at dusk. She kept writing. Neighbors. I have served with you in the Senate since I was young. I have watched the banners change, and the names of our security forces change, and the tone of our debates change. And I have told myself that each change was a compromise we could afford because the core of us remained intact. Today I watched the core move. I stood in our chamber while a man we once called Chancellor told us that fear is the price of order, and that secrecy is the price of safety, and that obedience is the price of peace. I've been told to be grateful. She saw his face in the words, the way the light took it. Too even, too flat, the camera's careful not to linger on scar or line. She kept going. I am not grateful. I am a representative of free people, and I will not be grateful for the chance to be quiet. The sentence startled her with its intimacy. She let it stand. She wrote slowly, building the case like a bridge across a chasm. Each statement linked to the next by something stronger than outrage. There would be time for naming crimes. Now she needed to name themselves. The ones listening, the ones who would look for themselves in her voice and decide whether to risk everything because they recognized it. When she reached the sentence that had been sitting behind her sternum for a year, the stylus hesitated almost imperceptibly. I declare rebellion. She wrote it small in the middle of the slate, as if it were something fragile in a jeweler's tray. She did not frame it. She did not soften it. Around it, she built what she could. The promise that her life belonged to those who would be endangered by her words. The assurance that rebellion did not mean revenge, that it meant refusing to be organized around fear. When she finished, the text was shorter than she expected. That seemed right. More than words would have to carry it now. She set the stylus aside and breathed until the tremor left her hands. Then she encrypted the document, then encrypted the encryption with a safehouse key from a different life, and slotted the slate into the communications module that lay disguised beneath her desk as a shelf of books. Te Kulma, her chief aide, arrived as the first thin gray of dawn made the sky lanes look like scratches of light. Te had a face made for difficult news, alert, composed, less handsome than affable, which encouraged people to be their ordinary selves around him. He leaned through the study door with the weariness of a man who had not slept, but had worn his exhaustion into a shape that let him keep moving. "You're early," Mon said. "You're earlier." He closed the door behind him and stood with his hands behind his back. A schoolboy before a headmistress if you didn't watch the eyes. "We expected you would move soon. We did not expect today. Today." she said. Before the habits harden. That's the most Chandrilan phrase you've said in months. He smiled, and it was not mocking. So we're doing this. If you are with me, she said, you can still walk away. Senator, he said gently, where would I walk that the Emperor's gaze does not reach? He came to the desk. Show me the words. She turned the slate toward him. He read quickly but carefully, marking with one fingertip the place where he wanted to return, not interrupting. When he finished, his hand stayed there, pressed lightly to the 3 words that would change his life. I will tell you what I tell all my clients, he said, because he had once been a banker and there were jokes neither of them would put away. It is possible to be brave and cautious at the same time. We will try, she said. I will not try to change your mind, Tay said. I did that last year, and you listened to me because the time was wrong. I believe you again. The time is right. But we must not be theatrical when everyone expects you to be. He paused. No balcony speeches. No plaza scenes. The Emperor knows how to choreograph a public catastrophe. He will make the crowd a weapon. Nendawand. We will speak in the chamber, she said. There is no better place. Our people sent us there to speak for them. If I must be arrested for saying their name, it should be where their name has the most meaning. Then we need the Holonet to carry it, Tay said, already rearranging his day in his mind. They will cut the official feed as soon as your voice reaches the wrong register. We must get you onto the private channels before that. I know 2 engineers in broadcast maintenance who still believe the Senate is a place, not a brand. If we can get a message buffer staged in a relay that looks dull. Then? Dull, she repeated, amused despite herself. Dull is how freedom moves on Coruscant now, Tay said. Accountant colored. Clipboard speed. We will not wear capes. The Senate Guard? She asked. He tilted his head. Not dependable. Some of them bristle in the proper places, but their commanding officers answer to the same people the storm units do now. If we bring anyone close, it should be people who already know how to vanish in this city. Dockmen, silt sweeps, bakery haulers, the men and women in orange day vests that no one looks at twice. Men? Dockmen and bakers, Mon said softly. More honest than any bodyguard I could buy. They will do it, Tay said. If they believe the speech is not for the Senate, but for them. It is, she said. It always has been. Then we'll need buses, Tay said. One to get you to the service level under the Senate district, one to get you away, and a redirection packet for the aerial traffic controllers. We can't outrun the security flights, but we can convince them you've gone north when you've gone west. I know a slicer in the freight union who owes me 6 favors. I can trade them down to 5. Now. Mon looked at him and saw the fear and the brightness together. Tay, you understand what this means for you personally. He shrugged with one shoulder. I don't know how to live any other way than the way I am living when I am doing the thing that makes sense to me. He glanced at the window, where the morning had gathered enough strength to make the skyline pearly. Also, I never liked capes. They worked. Work made the fear useful. They took old routes they had mapped not for politics but for philanthropy. The hospitals where the funding had been cut, the neighborhoods where the water tasted of metal and the filters never arrived. Those routes were strings on which they could hang a different kind of message. Tay made calls that did not sound like calls. He spoke in the language of favors and invoices and holiday rosters. Mon wrote to 3 colleagues in a code they had invented as jokes years ago. Just enough that, if a censor looked, it would scan as eccentric but legal. All 3 knew her well enough to recognize when the edges of her sentences were too clean. Bail Organa arrived without his crest, which meant he had come alone. He let himself in through the kitchen like a relative and stood for a moment with his eyes closed, hearing the kettle that had just clicked off. He was barefaced in a way she had rarely seen outside of Alderaan. The years in his eyes were for her. He did not let people see them as a rule. I assume this is not a social call, he said. She held up the slate. He read more quickly than Tay, but he held his breath longer at the end. When he looked up, His mouth was a thin, tired line. "Man, you know what I will say. I will say we should wait. I will say we can do more good gathering than scattering." "Bail," she said softly. "We are already scattered. We are scattered across systems and scattered across our courage. Every time we lie about the names of things, we scatter a little more. If I wait, I will call it patience. But my daughter will call it fear." He winced at the word daughter, the place where his own heart was least protected. "You will be arrested on the floor." "Perhaps," she said. "Perhaps not. If they act too quickly, they confirm the truth of what I say. If they let me finish, they confirm it by cowardice. Then they will not be that careful," Bale said. "The man we served is gone. The man in his place is a different species of politician. And yet he still wants a legend," Mon said. "He wants to be remembered as the inevitable. He cannot arrest definition itself on his first morning. He will wait until the second." Bale let out a breath and laughed without amusement. "You're right. That is the kind of patience tyrants have the luxury to afford." "Come with me," she said. "You ask much. I ask what I must. If I declare alone, it is a gesture. If you stand beside me, it becomes a choice other people can make. If a pair of worlds says no, a third will find its voice. If three, a fourth." "Chandrila," he said. "Alderain, and—" She did not look away. "Naboo. If the Queen will listen to her dead senator's friends and not to her fear." Bale closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were clear. "I will stand with you. But we do this in the chamber, not as children breaking rules. We do it as the most boring people alive. We will request the floor. We will follow procedure. We will cite code. When they come for us, they will have to break the rules they just wrote." "Then dull," Mon said, and he recognized Tay's word and smiled. "Dull as mud," he said. They arrived at the Senate by the service road, in a bus whose paid-up freight license would bore an auditor to tears. The morning had brightened into that institutional daylight that Coruscant did like no other world. White and polite and utterly indifferent. The Senate's marbled approach had been swept. Banners in the new imperial crimson hung straight as convictions. Mon and Bale did not walk together. They were two senators arriving early. Nothing more. The Senate guard did not glance twice. The new storm units, white armor glaring beneath the sun, stood a little apart, as if the building itself remembered the old guard's boots and had not decided whether to welcome these replacements. Inside, the chamber felt like it always had. Too grand for the work. Too many seats for the number of voices that meant anything. The Emperor's platform like a sane man's nightmare, floating where it could turn to face any sector. Senators took their places in twos and threes, clustered by old friendships and new fears. When Mon stepped into her pod, she felt the small rise and the hum underfoot, machinery translating will into movement. Tay stood behind her at the console, quiet as a shadow. Bale's pod hung 3 rings over, the light on his dais off while he consulted a datapad, as if nothing in the galaxy had ever mattered less than his morning reading. Masameda banged the staff and the chamber drew its breath. The Emperor rose. He had learned to modulate the voice that the cameras carried. Weight, not rasp. Benevolence, not threat. To the naked ear, in the room, he sounded almost ordinary. That had always been the uncanny thing about him. His presence could fill an alley or vanish in a ballroom. "Order!" Masameda intoned, and the recording lights brightened subtly, the holonet array drinking every word. Palpatine began with condolences for the many losses of the recent chaos, then gratitude for the courage of the clone army, then a meditation on the meaning of unity. He was a careful fisherman. By the time he reached the end of the first netful of their hearts, he had sounded like their better selves talking to them from a dignified distance. Mon felt the pods rail under her hands, a reality to anchor to. Tay shifted his weight once, then was still. At a pause that had been a pause 1,000 times before, Bale raised his floor light and asked for recognition. Masameda, forced by protocol, Granted it. Bale spoke in the measured, exasperating cadences of a patient man compelled to be more patient. For a minute and a half, nothing he said was fire. Everything was flint. He asked to move a minor item ahead on the agenda. He asked for a rereading of a recent security statute. He asked for a small correction to be entered into the record. The chamber quieted, with the particular irritation that precedes attention. Mon raised her light. Masameda hesitated, made a show of consulting the docket, then inclined his head. Senator Mothma of Chandrila. Her pod slid gently forward into the wider well. She did not look at the Emperor. She spoke as if to the pages of the record she had spent her life believing in. "My colleagues," she said, "I request the floor for a statement of conscience." The sentence had a scent to it. Dust and wood polish, and something like rain. The words had been spoken in this chamber before, in other crises. Procedurally, it meant very little. Symbolically, it meant a great deal. You could see the recognition travel across the tiers, the way bodies leaned in or leaned away. The holonet array flexed to accommodate it. Mon gave the record a list of code citations and then handed the room the core of her voice. "I will be brief." She lied with grace. "I have always believed that the purpose of our service is to take the power given to us by our worlds and return it to them made larger by our care. Lately we have taken that power and held it very close. We have done so in the name of safety. We have done so because we have been afraid. We have been told that secrecy is a shield and that silence is a civic duty. We have asked for gratitude while making our people small." Dam? She could feel the cut of the words. Somewhere above her, a stormtrooper shifted his stance. "I cannot be grateful for fear," Mon said. "I cannot congratulate secrecy. I cannot accept that obedience is identical to peace. And so, with full knowledge of the consequences, I declare rebellion against the notion that our neighbors must be quiet in order to be safe." The hush that followed was not quiet. It was machinery winding up. It was the decision of men in a control room to move their hands. It was Bale's heartbeat, audible to her only because she shared its rhythm. It was Masameda, lifting his staff a few centimeters and holding it there, because he had not yet received the nod to bring it down. "I ask my colleagues who remember the Republic, not as a color or a song, but as a discipline to join me," she said. "I ask those of you who still wake in the night with the names of your people in your mouth to join me. I ask those of you who don't know how to explain to your children why you trade their future for your comfort to join me. Not to burn. Not to punish. To insist in public, together, that we will not build a society on the premise that men with secrets know us better than we know ourselves." "Nen? And?" Masameda brought the staff down. The holonet light above Mon's head winked once, the official signal to neutrals that a procedural transition was underway, and then steadied. She saw Tay's hands flash across the console behind her, saw him put into motion the dull miracle he had built overnight. A buffer slid into a relay that no one who was awake loved enough to monitor, the message feeding into 1,000 unremarkable dishes on rooftops, with laundry lines flapping beside them. The Emperor spoke. He did not raise his voice. "Senator Mothma." He let the words fall with the weight he wanted the audience to hear. "You are out of order." Mon inclined her head the exact degree prescribed by the procedural guide. "Your Excellency, the statute allows for a statement of conscience to be entered and read." "Then enter it," he said. Silently. She looked into the nearest camera, imagining the way the picture would fall onto a holoplate in a canteen on an outer rim dock. Flat, blue-tinted, unkind to skin. She did not blink. "Neighbors," she said, "and let the rest be heard not by the chamber, but by the laundries and the docks and the drivers of buses." On an outlying level of Coruscant, a bakery crew chief named Lutha Murray wiped flour from her hands and told her team to stop the mixers. They stood in their hair caps and orange vests and listened as if to a weather report that would decide their next month. On Ryloth, in an alley where the heat had already softened the morning, a one-eyed veteran set down his dice and whispered, "Listen." In a Chandralan market, A woman buying greens closed her eyes because the wind off the river felt different all at once. In a mechanic's shed on Ferrex, a boy pretended he wasn't listening and absorbed every word. Mon said the sentence. She said it in the register you use when you say a pledge with your hand on something older than you. I declare rebellion. The Senate erupted the way wild things do when a cage is opened, and the men around it are still pretending they have the key. Pods drifted, lights flared, lines of protocol collided. Ahmed's staff struck the floor and struck the floor again. Security moved along the ring. The holonet feed coughed, staggered, and, on its official channel, stilled. But in the dull relay no one had loved in years, the buffer held and kept holding. Mon's voice stubborn as water. Not to unmake what we are, but to insist that what we are cannot be decided in private rooms. We will not harm civilians. We will not target hospitals or schools. We will not kill for spectacle. We will not be made monstrous by those who benefit from monsters. Down. Storm units moved. Mon watched them come the way one watches a storm coming across a lake, not because watching will stop it, but because naming has dignity. She heard Tay inhale once behind her, and the breath was like a promise he could not afford to make out loud. Bale's pod slid smoothly to meet hers, not touching. Two small worlds in close orbit. His microphone light flared, then died. He raised his hands on his console where the cameras could see them. The Emperor watched, head cocked like a curious bird, as if considering the species of this display. Chandrila, Bale said in a voice pitched for the chamber, but captured by the buffer. Alderaan. A pause long enough for a man to decide whether to be frightened. We stand with the senator. Something changed in the room, and also in the city. Things that had been preparatory became actual. Plans that had been sketches became turns of the wheel that opened doors. On the Senate's lowest levels, men in orange vests stepped into service corridors and pulled a dolly with a clerk's label and a jammed wheel, and the jam was the signal. In the broadcast booth, a woman who had done nothing remarkable for 20 years, who kept schedules as if they were strings of beads, looked at the command to cut and did not cut it. The storm units arrived at Mon's pod. They did not touch her. The one in front, no rank flashes on his chest plate, a blankness that had become a uniform, said, "Senator Mothma by order of the Emperor." By whose statute? Mon asked, not because she thought it would save her, but because it would be written. He hesitated. Mon saw the centimeter of grace she had argued for with Bale, and she used it. She touched the control and sent the pod drifting back toward the ring, slow as a leaf. She watched the storm unit recalibrate obedience to include choreography. Bale's pod matched her. In some other world, they might have been young again, practicing the gravities of debate, when the worst thing that could happen was a vote lost by 3. They did not get far. The white line of armor closed. Ahmed's staff struck the floor for the last time that morning. The sound that rose was not an echo, but a response. Senators shouted. Some shouted at her, and she listened even now, because she did not intend to make a world where only agreeable voices earned attention. Some shouted for her. A handful sat with their hands folded neatly before them. Those were the ones she worried about most. "Senator," the storm unit said again, with the patience of a man handling a crate marked fragile, who knows his orders are to drop it. "By order of the Emperor." "Senator," Tay whispered behind her. "It's time." "Neighbors," Mon said to the buffer, which was still miraculously dull and persistent. "Know this. If you choose to resist, choose mercy as your tactic. Do not be what they accuse you of being. Gather names. Talk aloud. Build the habit of refusing to be alone." They took her by the arm. The grip was professional, not cruel. She felt the pod's deck tilt minutely underfoot as the controls were overridden. Her stomach noticed the change before her mind did. Bale did not reach for her. He had planned not to. He turned off his microphone and bent his head as if reading. She did not look back to the Emperor's platform. They took her to a corridor that smelled of the Polish that had always been used there, which was wrong somehow, that something so small had not changed when everything else had. In the echo of the chamber behind them, A procedural debate was carried on by men who were not sure whether they had just watched the first scene of a play or a loop of an old feed. Tay fell into step. The storm unit did not seem to notice he was not supposed to be there. Dullness created its own permission. They reached the service lift. The doors slid open on a box that had carried 1,000 crates of spare chair parts and ornamental plants and the guts of 100 hollow projectors. Tay pressed the floor for the level below the level you thought of as the bottom. When the doors shut, the silence was startling. Sound in the chamber had always been like weather. In here, the weather had been turned off. Tay watched the numbers change. "We have 46 seconds," he said. 46. Mon asked, because it was a human thing to say. 39, Tay said. The relay is built to buffer 60. There is a manual reset. Lutha Murray is going to kick it with her foot at 49 whether it needs it or not. The bus is waiting. It is painted the color of a bad mood. Then, Mon exhaled once and found that, beneath her ribs, there was a lightness that had nothing to do with relief. It felt like the moment a ship's struts release and the ship remembers what it is for. When the doors opened, the air was damp and unceremonious. The service corridor stretched gray in both directions, unlovely and clean. A man with a dolly and an orange vest stood with his hands on the handle. He had the kind of face you would trust with your mother's grocery change. "Senator," he said. "Ma'am." He nodded to the storm units without fear or deference. "I've got deliveries." "You're out of your lane," one of the storm units said, and the man tilted his head toward the left-hand door that always stuck and always had. "Stuck," he said. "It's the hinge. Been putting in requests for 2 months." The storm unit tried the door and found it stuck. The second storm unit moved to help, because habit was a force. Tay touched Mon's elbow. She took one step, then another. The man with the dolly let go of the handle, and the dolly rolled forward, wheel complaining. The complaint was louder than it needed to be. The storm unit on the right turned his helmet a fraction. Mon and Tay slipped past in the space a complaint makes between two men with orders. The door at the end of the corridor opened on daylight, a lower daylight with trash smell in it. Honest as bread. They came into a warren of loading bays where the shadows were careful with themselves. The bus waited, square, patient. Its paint that implacable utility blue that vanished into city hues. Lutha Murray stood with one foot on the step, her orange vest brighter than the morning. "Kick worked," she said by way of greeting. "We've got, what? 4 minutes? 2, Tay said. "Maybe 3. 2.5, Lutha said. She put out her hand, and Mon took it. The other woman's palm was still dusted with flour. "You said neighbors," Lutha said. "No one says neighbors in the Senate unless they mean it." "I meant it," Mon said. "Good," Lutha said. "Get in." They rode without talking. The bus was empty but for them. Its seats smelled of oil and old rain. The driver wore the look of a man for whom danger had always been a budget line in his day, to be worked around with humor. Up above, the polished world pretended to go on. At street line, nothing pretended. You either moved or you didn't. The first roadblock came at the ramp to the underlane that would take them west. 2 storm units stood with their helmets turned toward the flow, not scanning, listening. Tay leaned forward and handed the driver a printed sheet. The paper was the kind used for deliveries 3 administrations ago. The font hurt to look at. The stamp was slightly crooked. "Where did you find a printer?" the driver said under his breath, delighted. "Borrowed it from the museum branch that no one funds," Tay said. "It would have been a crime not to use it." The storm unit waved them through. The driver managed not to grin. "I've been wanting to do that since I was 10. Forged forms are more soothing than identity chips," Tay said. "Everyone relaxes with paper." They made the turn. Mon watched the Senate dome vanish behind a tangle of service pylons. The city changed character, as it always did when you left the ceremonial corps. The roads knew the weight of cargo here. The turned ratty understood buses. They crossed a bridge that had a view of 3 other bridges, all older, 2 in better repair. Lutha watched the traffic with a professional eye. "They'll search buses in a bit," she said. They don't know which ones to search yet. They think like parade men. Parade men, Tay repeated, as if learning a term of art. They move in lines, they've practiced. You break the line, they take a minute regrowing their spine. Luther glanced back at Mondote. You ready to go underground, Senator? Whatever gets us to the next sentence, Mon said. They went underground by way of a ramp that looked like a mistake on the city planner's diagram. At the bottom, a service gate made of something that had once been expensive and now only looked proud. The driver tapped a rhythm on the console, which sent a rhythm through the grill. Old code, old housekeeping. A light changed from indifferent red to weary green. We can't keep this one, the driver said, as if he were speaking of a favorite tool that had finally had too many dents. They'll mark the plate. We'll get you to the tunnel and you'll walk. It's a clean 3 minutes to the safe side. Safe, Tay said. A word that never means what you think. He helped Mon down. Luther went ahead, not because she needed to, but because it kept people from stopping her with questions. The tunnel smelled like steam and ghost metal. Pipes ran like arteries overhead. Condensation made small, unheroic rain on their shoulders. At a bend, a man was waiting. He was young in the way that means he had learned how to be older by hard practice. He wore a maintenance coat, and his hands had the long, careful fingers of a person who repaired things whose owners had cried while handing them over. Call me Rel, he said. I'm not, but that's what you can call me. He looked at Mon without awe. You said neighbors. My mother cried. She doesn't cry. Let's go. Where? Mon asked, because it mattered to keep her mind making maps. Depot 6, Rel said. The one that was supposed to be closed last quarter, and isn't because we still have to move lunches and beds and library carts in this city. Then we move you to a bread van that's already late, on purpose, because Luther knows the supervisor reads time like a suggestion. He glanced at Luther, who saluted with 2 fingers. Then you go to a friend's place where the curtains are awful, and you'll stay a day, and then not at all. By sundown, the Emperor's men will have the shape of your shadow. We will change its shape. What about the others? Mon asked. It felt like a frivolous question until she heard it in the tunnel and knew it wasn't. The listeners. They heard it, Rel said, not looking back. Some turned it off. Some turned it up. Some saved. They moved. In Mon's head, a different corridor unrolled. The one the storm units were taking with their urgency calm and their blasters at low ready. She saw the moment when the bus they would choose to stop did not have her in it. She saw the face of the junior officer who would be blamed and the way he would go very still, as he understood that blame was not what would happen next. She had been in politics long enough to understand the force of humiliation. She had learned not to let it steer her. Depot 6 was exactly what Rel had promised. A big room that had never been beautiful, and therefore could not be ruined by neglect. Carts and crates and boxes with stickers that had outlived their originators. A smell of cardboard and soap. People who looked like they belonged there, which is to say, people whose clothes had learned to hold tools without noticing. They did not greet her by name. They did not salute. They did not look away. She felt larger and smaller at once. A person and a vector. The bread van was late in the way that meant the day's bread would still be warm when it was sold. Luther had already shouted at 2 men in authority on her communicator. She sounded like a person annoyed by incompetence, and Mon had never been more grateful for the theater of ordinary life. Curtains, Rel said as they reached the door. I wasn't joking. They are very bad. You will wish the Emperor had arrested you instead. Let him try, Luther said. I've got rolls to get out. Mon put her hand on the van's frame, feeling the vibration through the metal as the engine idled. Above them, the city rearranged its surface to pretend nothing had happened. Below, a different city took its first breath. Neighbors. she said under her breath, as if returning the word to the mouth that had given it to her when she was a child. Then she stepped into the van. They did not take the obvious route. They took the kind of route people who cannot afford to be seen take. Half-spent alleys, apartments whose doors were open to let air through, and hospitality too if you were careful. The backs of small shrines where a ribbon had been tied to a pipe for luck. The curtains at the safe apartment were indeed terrible, faded red with white ovals that might have been moons in a different life. A woman with a braided crown of hair that had gone half silver met them at the door, and put her hands on Moan's shoulders, like a mother and a general both. "Eat," she said. "Then sleep. The city will take its next turn without you for a few hours. We are not martyrs. We are neighbors. We must keep our strength." Moan sat at the small table as if it were the Senate and the chipped bowl were a dais. The soup was hot and plain. She had not realized until the first spoonful how empty she was. Tay sat opposite, his spoon suspended mid-air as he listened to something in his earpiece that did not require panic yet, but could be coaxed to it if neglected. "Bail?" Moan asked. "Under house observation," Tay said. "Not arrest. That word is not being used today. I suspect it will be used tomorrow. He knows the difference and is acting accordingly." "And the feed?" "Held for 62 seconds on the dull relay," Tay said, and his smile this time was not professional at all. "Lutha's kick bought us 2 seconds," Lutha said from the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "I told you. Dull works." "They don't watch dull." The woman with the braided hair poured tea that smelled like a field after rain. "Rest," she said again. It was not a suggestion. "The next hours will be for running. This hour is for being a person." Moan slept. Die. But when she woke, the city had changed again. The air had that metallic taste it got when the security flyers had been out in numbers. The sound had a long, sinewy quality, like the city was stretching around an ache. Tay was at the window, the terrible curtain drawn back an inch. "They've put your face on the screens," he said without turning. "Not the pretty portrait. The real one from this morning. They're calling you a disruptor. That's the word. Not traitor. Not yet." "Disruptor," she said. They made it sound like a brand. "It is easier to market hatred than law," Tay said. "But the word matters. They want to make you small enough to fit in their mouths. You will not fit." She splashed water on her face in a tiny sink and felt 20 years come off with the sleep. "What now?" "Now," Tay said, "we go to the people who make quiet things louder." They dressed in clothes that did not remember the Senate. Moan braided her hair differently, quicker, the way she had done as a student when there had been too much to read, and she had not wanted to deal with pins. The woman with the braided hair gave her a shawl that made her look like a citizen instead of a symbol, which was the point. Lutha went ahead again, because the city made way for someone with a parcel and a deadline. Rel met them with a new name, because names in a city were maps, and they were redrawing their map every hour. They took a stair that had not been cleaned since before the war and let the dust pretend to be their ally. At the bottom, a door opened on a room full of machines that had already begun to look antique, which meant they would be invisible next month. 3 people looked up and did not ask questions. The oldest of them, a woman with a tattoo of a river on her wrist that ran under her sleeve and came out again on the back of her hand, gestured to a chair in front of a console. "We can make you a rumor," she said. "Or we can make you a fact. Rumors get you numbers. Facts get you neighbors." "Facts," Moan said. "Rumors breed fast and die young. Facts it is." The woman's hands moved, and lights changed their minds. "Name's Sorella. My father named me for a story. I hope never to live up to it." Sorella explained the plan the way a carpenter explains joints. They would not make a broadcast. They would make a conversation. Moan would record a series of short messages tailored to specific circuits: kitchen co-ops, dock foreman's posts, small art schools, union halls, repair shops. The messages would be addressed like letters. They would travel on cables that had been carrying invoices and condolences and jokes for years. Each letter would ask for a reply, a name, A promise, a copy forwarded to a neighbor who had not heard. They would not ask anyone to take to the streets yet, because parades were where parade men excelled. They would ask people to learn each other's names aloud again, to say good morning and mean it, to repair the small rooms where history is held, libraries, clinics, the places where the empire would rather citizens come as clients than as owners. "We will need a symbol," Tay murmured, more to himself than the room. "People love a letterhead." Sorella snorted. "Then give them a bird. They always like birds. They look at birds and think of the sky." "Something like a star that flies," Rel said shyly, sketching with a finger on dust. "Not like a warbird, like something that brings spring." Mon watched the shape take place in the desire of the room. "Make it small," she said. "Something you could scratch on a wall with a nail. Something a child could draw." Sorella pushed the first mic toward Mon. "Speak, Senator." She spoke until her voice was a little hoarse, and then until it remembered how to be soft again. She spoke to kitchen co-ops and dock foremen, and the people who kept the city's old pipes from breaking, and the young men who made strings of cheap lights for little festivals on rooftops. She told each of them a small truth and asked for one in return. She asked them for the names of the 3 people they could trust to receive a message. She asked for the name of the person they would call if the power went out. She asked them to practice, saying the names of their closest neighbors once a day, so that the names would be there when they needed to make a list quickly. Between messages, Sorella would lift a hand, and Mon would drink water, and Lutha would mutter something about ovens. Tay watched the console like a man watching his child sleep. Rel adjusted levels with a tenderness that made Mon want to cry. They were halfway through a set addressed to school librarians, when Sorella lifted her hand without looking up. The room's sound changed, a tightening, a listening. Mon felt it in the skin between her shoulder blades. "They found the relay," Sorella said. "The dull one. They're not going to be gentle with it this time." "How long?" Tay asked. "Enough to finish this one if you don't make it pretty. Then we go to ground and let the city do what cities do when winds change." Mon looked at the mic, then at the faces around her. She did not feel brave. She felt like a person who had decided to do a thing and was now doing it. That was all. "Neighbors," she said, addressing the librarians. And then, as if the word had reminded her, the city leaned closer to listen. When they left the machine room, the air outside had warmed by a degree. The sky between buildings was a paler blue, as if the city had turned its face one fraction toward day. A boy selling fruit from a cart looked at Mon, and then looked away with the peculiar dignity of people who have chosen to protect someone by pretending not to see them. Lutha bought a handful of something tart and pressed it into Mon's palm without comment. At a corner, a screen bolted to the wall played the day's official feed. The Emperor stood with 3 men whose uniforms had too much piping and not enough humility. The ticker called Mon a disruptor again, and then it stumbled. Just a flicker, just a breath, and carried a line from a kitchen circuit. "Neighbors, report your oven failures to the person 2 doors down and then to me." A name and a number followed. The flicker was gone. No one on the corner moved. Then the boy selling fruit laughed. Not loudly, not like a brave thing, but like a person hearing a joke told just for him. By late afternoon, the knock came on a door that was not theirs to open. The woman with the braided hair let them in the back and out the front and turned to tell the officers that yes, she had seen a woman matching that description. She had been wearing a blue shawl. No, green, and had gone left. No, right. The officers chose a direction. Choice is a force. It carries momentum, even when wrong. As the sun slid between towers like a coin being pocketed, Bale's face appeared on a small screen in the machine room. Sorella fingers fluttered to adjust it. The image was grainy, full of the honest snow of a signal that had made 3 risky hops. "Mon," he said. He did not speak her name out loud, but he said it in the turn of his head. "They will move at night. You know that. They will not leave you to sleep twice in the same place. Go to the river." "There is no river," Tay said reflexively, and then corrected himself. "There were 3, under the city, older than the scape that had been built over them. The oldest was more myth than pipe. We can get to the maintenance channel. Sorella, I know a man who loves old water, she said. He will be at dinner now. I will ruin it for him. He will forgive me because his wife will tell him to. Rel had been doodling in dust again without knowing it. He looked down. The shape that had come again to his hand was the bird. Small and plain, its wings a suggestion. He looked up and found Mon watching his face, not his drawing. We are going to lose things, he said, as if confessing a theft. We were always going to lose things, Mon said. Now we will choose which things and why. At dusk, the city changed registers once more. Traffic slowed and then sped. The lights came on at a different frequency. People whose lives were bounded by shifts changed places with people whose lives were bounded by favors. The first rumor of the day had grown legs, and now it put on shoes. Sorella's man who liked old water arrived with breath that smelled of stew and an apology on his tongue. He led them down a set of stairs whose railing had been polished by hands that had been dead a century. At the bottom, the air was cooler, and it had a different kind of silence. A silence that belonged to stone. The channel was just wide enough for 2 boats and just high enough for hope. Water moved there the way an old song moves, when no one is looking. Mon breathed in and thought of Chandrila, and the thought did not break her. They took a skiff that had carried maintenance crews and romance and contraband in equal measure. The man at the rudder did not speak. His hands knew the current. They slid in a darkness that was not threatening because it had been made by human choices, not malice. At a bend, voices echoed ahead. Security men, their rhythm off because they were underground, and their orders had been written for the air. The man at the rudder raised a hand, and the skiff pressed itself into shadow, as if a painter had put it there. The voices passed. One of them laughed at a joke that would not have been funny above ground. The laugh sounded young and stupid and alive. Mon did not hate it. When they came up again, hours later, the sky had changed to a color that belonged to endings. They emerged into a neighborhood where the buildings were closer to human scale, and the windows showed people eating and arguing and making small decisions. The curtains here were better. Sorella's friend with the river tattoo on her wrist had cousins here who had cousins elsewhere. The network felt like a net that had been mended often. Mon stood in a dim kitchen while steam climbed from a pot, and the smell made her close her eyes for a second. She could not go home. Home was wherever her voice fetched up and made a shape the neighbors could recognize. The thought did not crush her. It steadied her. Tomorrow, Tay said softly, rolling his shoulders to see if fear had made a home there. Tomorrow they will have chosen words with more teeth. Then we will choose better promises, Mon said. She reached for the cup Sorella offered, and felt the warmth sit in her hands like a vow. We will ask people to do only what they can do, and then to do it well. The Empire demands everything and gives nothing. We will demand small things and give them back as trust. Then shire. Trust, Lutha said, as if tasting a spice she had not used in years. That's a new flavor. Old, Sorella said. We forgot. In the morning, they woke to find the city looking at itself. Screens showed Mon's face beside a list of the words the Empire had decided to use. Disruptor, destabilizer, demagogue. The words were not wrong in their etymologies. They were wrong in their application. In the kitchens and the mechanics' sheds and the small libraries, people began to invent different words. Neighbor, cousin, midwife, Yves-d'Or, friend étoile. The starboard, small, stubborn, scratchable with a nail, began to appear in chalk near doorways, where the morning would not wash it away. It appeared in a school lesson written by a teacher who had decided to risk remembering that history belonged to the living. It appeared tucked into the corner of a mural on a stairwell, where a child would touch it every day, on the way to class. Mon's name did not matter as much as the way those names were said aloud again in long halls, with bad light, and in corners with no light at all. She listened to the replies to her letters on Sorella's console, and sometimes she cried because the messages were so ordinary. We have 3 trucks. We can hide 2 people for a night. My cousin can fix the transmitter if he has the right diode. We don't have the right diode. Does anyone have the right diode? We have found the right diode. Good morning. She met with Baal twice more before the Empire's patience wore its disguise thin. Once in a disused archive where the air tasted of dust and long-ago arguments. Once on a moving walkway where they did not look at each other, but spoke of the shape of the thing they were making. He had decided to let Alderaan be what it had always tried to be. Gentle and implacable. And to risk its gentleness being mistaken for weakness, until it wasn't. He told her, with a particular tightening of his mouth, that there would be a cost, no matter what he did. There is no path without cost, Mon said. There is only choosing your debtors. And our creditors, Baal said. The children. Our neighbors, Mon said, and he nodded. The first arrest of someone whose name mattered to the Senate happened 3 days after the declaration. It was Ter Tenil, who had always dressed like a scholar and spoken like a farmer, and had a way of making a room notice the thing it was ignoring. He was taken without spectacle. He was charged without naming the charge. He was held somewhere with no window. The arrest was a test balloon. The people popped it, not by rioting, but by saying his name out loud in markets and workrooms and small bars. Saying the name of a prisoner out loud is an old spell. It is a way of pouring water where something grows. The second arrest was less careful. A transport was stopped, searched badly, and a child in the back started to cry. The soldier who lifted the tarp to look inside had a face Mon would have recognized in any century. Exhausted, humiliated by the necessity of intimidating people who had done nothing at all. He put the tarp back down. He did not write the report his superior wanted. He was yelled at later, and it did not matter because he had made the choice that moved a single soul from fear to breath. The first act of violence committed in Mon's name came a week after the declaration. It was small and ugly. 2 men with a grievance and a bomb that did not care who listened to their grievance. Mon sat in Sorella's kitchen and heard the casualty list and spoke so softly that even Tay had to lean forward to hear her. We do not do this, she said. We do not become what those men made. We don't, Sorella said. But some will try. Some will want the feeling that comes with making something explode. It is easy to confuse that feeling with power because it is loud. Ben Sorrel. Loud things die quickly, Lutha said. Bread rises slowly. Mon did what she could do. Spoke to the neighbors as if she were speaking to men she loved who had knives in their hands. She named the dead with care. She asked the men with knives in their hands to bring the knives to the bakery, where Lutha would give them a job, and a reason to stand all day that did not end with blood. Lutha swore at her, and then did it because cursing at a good idea was one of the ways she kept herself honest. A month after the declaration, in the thick of a morning that felt no more dramatic than any morning, a message arrived from a world Mon had always been careful not to romanticize. It was from Kashyyyk, the words clumsy and basic, but the music of them unmistakable. We hear neighbor. We have lost many. We will not be quiet. We will carry. You ride. The last 2 words had a humor that made her close her eyes to keep from crying. She read the message to the room, and for an entire minute no one spoke because everyone was building a little shelf inside themselves to put it on. That afternoon, a rumor moved faster than the facts did. That the Emperor would dissolve the Senate entirely. That there would be no chamber to speak in. That the old dome would be made a museum or a mausoleum. Mon understood that the rumor served him as much as it served her. Fear of losing a useless thing could be used to distract the people from building the needed one. She went to the machine room and recorded a message that sounded like a neighbor with her sleeves rolled. The Senate is a building. The Republic is a behavior. Do not mistake one for the other. If they shut the doors, we will speak in the stairwells. If they lock the stairwells, we will speak in the kitchens. If they take our kitchens, we will speak in the streets, and we will bring bread. Her name traveled. It traveled faster than she could, and it gathered its own epithets, some ugly, some worshipful. She warned the people around her against both. Worship was as useless as slander for the work that had to be done. She wanted to be a person in a room with a list and a pencil, not a statue. Statues were too easily toppled or used to hold up the wrong roof. The Emperor watched. Of course he did. He let her become useful to him in certain ways, as a shape against which he could throw light. He practiced patience. He took names and moved budgets and refined his police. He let a handful of small councils on quiet worlds have their little debates, so that when he shut the other councils down, there would be an argument to be had about balance. He understood the theater better than any of them. He had written a good part of it, but he did not understand neighbors. He did not understand how many kinds of courage there were, and how small they could be while still altering the weight of a day. He did not understand why the city had begun to taste different to its people, why the water felt cleaner even when it wasn't. At night, when Mon lay down on beds that belonged to people who insisted she take the warm side, she sometimes dreamed not of speeches or arrests or escape routes, but of reading circles in small rooms where the light was yellow and the voices were steady. She dreamed of an old woman teaching a boy how to knead dough, her hands guiding his as if he were learning to write his name. She dreamed of a man setting a chair outside his door and sitting in it not to patrol but to greet. She dreamed of a library with broken locks and whole books. In those dreams, the rebellion looked like 1,000 tiny hands lifting the corners of a great cloth and moving together without needing to see the whole. When she woke, she translated the dream back into a list, another message to the mechanics' halls asking for volunteers, a visit to the clinic to ask the midwives what they needed, a reminder to herself to write to the waterkeepers because old rivers made new maps possible. News came that the Emperor had shifted a division of storm units off-world to deal with a miners' dispute that had become inconvenient. The city's upper levels felt safer that day. The lower levels felt watchful. Mon walked, with 2 neighbors and a shawl, through a market that now carried more vegetables than it had a month ago, because someone had decided not to redirect a shipment to a party. People looked at her, and then looked away, and then looked back, and some of them nodded, and some of them didn't, and both were forms of love. She told a man selling cheap tools that the senator from Chandrila had been a fool her whole life about something or other. He laughed and gave her a small wrench for free. She took it and paid him double later through Sorella, because gifts and debts were delicate, and she would not let herself be made into a saint by a ledger error. One evening, when the air smelled of a storm that would not bother itself to arrive, she looked up at the sky between buildings and saw, high and precise, a formation of birds. Not the starbird Rel had drawn into the dust, but real birds, escaping a cargo hold where they had been brought for a governor's menagerie or a wedding or some other silly thing. They cut a ragged wedge through the air. People stopped and watched, because birds were rare, and flight was a promise. A child beside her said something in a language Mon did not know. The girl's mother translated. She said the sky is teaching itself how to read. Mon laughed, once, aloud, and people looked at her like they would look at a neighbor laughing. Pleasant surprise, unafraid to share the moment. She put her hand to her mouth, ashamed of the joy, and then she let herself feel it fully. The city noticed and added it to the ledger that was not written down anywhere, but that people carried every day and consulted when choosing whether to stand up or to sit still. The day they finally came to take her, when dullness would not protect and the city would have to be more clever than a bus. Smelled like hot stone and old copper. But that day had not come yet. This was still the morning where bread was being kneaded, where a library received back a book that had been missing since before the war, where a mechanic fixed a diode, where a man who had been told his whole life to be a soldier chose to be a neighbor instead. And in the Senate, a clerk filed a document she was not supposed to file under a category no one would think to check. It was the statement of conscience, the one Mon had read aloud on the day that had begun a different weather. The clerk was not brave. She was precise. Precision is a kind of courage. Later, when men came to fire her, a flood in a lower level prevented them from reaching her desk. The flood had not been arranged. The flood was a flood. The city had seasons. Mon had always believed that if you understood a season, you could plant correctly. She stepped out into the hallway with the terrible curtains and breathed. Tay slipped the small wrench into his pocket as if it were a talisman. Lutha told Sorella she would be late with the morning's loaves, and Sorella swore at her with affection. Rel left another tiny bird in the dust near the door where someone would see it and smile and not know why. Neighbors, Mon thought. Then she went to the next door and knocked. Ah, Kay. The woman whose curtains were unforgivable had kept a jar of nails on the windowsill for years. She told Mon this as if it mattered, and it did. In a city that was always new, the kept thing became an argument for continuity. The nails were not a weapon. They were for hanging family pictures in walls that had not been kind to families. When she was nervous, she sorted them by size without looking. That morning when Mon left with Tay and Lutha and Rel, she pressed one into Mon's palm as if to say, "Remember what we use our hands for." They moved through halls that smelled of boiled rice and oil, and the kind of soap that leaves your skin too clean. The city's traffic above them made a muffled ocean. Every door had a story. Every door had a risk profile. Mon's mind, which had been trained to parse votes and measure consequence by thousands, learned a new arithmetic, one that counted thresholds and stair creaks, and who would smile without giving anything away. At a landing where the light bulb had finally died, and no one had yet bothered to replace it, Rel paused and drew the starbird in the dust again, smaller this time, then wiped it away with his sleeve. Leaving it would have been a comfort. It would also have been an arrow. "People are frightened," Tay murmured. "And they are excited. It is an unpleasant combination." "It is a beginning," Mon said. "The feelings will learn their jobs." They reached the clinic, tucked behind a laundry that had a sign still proclaiming imperial sanitation standards from a decade ago, as if clean were a promise the Empire invented and could revoke. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and calendula. A woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows and a wrinkle between her brows that had been earned, not inherited, looked up. She did not smile. She did not ask names. She pointed to a shelf where a line of paper folders sat like small boats. "We have 11. She said. "2 of them are children. 1 is a fever we understand. 3 are bruises that understand themselves. 5 are fear pretending to be cough." She lifted one of the folders and tapped it. "And this is a man who will not stop talking." "Talking can be a symptom," Tay said, and she barked something like agreement. "Talking can be a cure," Mon said, "if we make space for it." The doctor. She would not give another name, and did not need to. Saw the way Mon stood and altered the rhythm of the room to accommodate it. The way competent women have always smuggled revolutions into errands. She sent Lutha to fetch hot water. She sent Rel to fix a hinge that squealed. She sent Tay to the back to take down a poster that had become untrue. She put her hand on Mon's sleeve for a second, and the touch felt like a permission slip. "You brought a voice," the doctor said. "We are short on those that do not make things worse." "I brought a letter," Mon said. "For you." Sorella had made them on paper because paper felt like a confidence. The city had been starved of confidences. The letters were small and exact. Lists of what the clinic might need, what the network could provide, and the names of 3 people who would come if an alarm were sounded that did not involve soldiers. The starbird was in the corner, little more than 2 curves and a point. The doctor read, nodded once, and slid the letter into a folder not labeled clinic at all. She put it between utility bills that no one would ever search. "What do you need?" Mon asked. "Need," the doctor mused, turning the taste of the word in her mouth. "Need is elastic. I need people, not to panic. I need to be able to call someone when there's a shortage of sterile gauze, and not have to fill out 3 forms that go to a bin that goes to a furnace. I need the rumor that I'm helping traitors to be boring." "Then? We can make you boring," Tay said gravely, and the doctor smiled properly then, for the first time. "We are very good at it." On the way out, a boy of 12, too tall for his years, and aware of it in the discomfort that kept his shoulders hunched, watched Mon with eyes that had seen more than they were ready for. He had a book under his arm, its cover furred at the edges by handling. Mon looked at the title and felt the odd ache that comes when a text you love is in the hands of a stranger who may love it differently. "Is it good?" she asked. The boy considered. weighing the cost of honesty. "The hero makes speeches," he said. "I like the baker." "Wise," Luther said. "Heroes go home hungry." "Not today," the doctor called from the back. "Everyone eats if there's a loaf left." They left through the same silent stair. At the top, the city had brightened into an afternoon that had arranged itself into queues and errands, and the small humiliations that keep people modest. Tay had a meeting arranged with a man who collected city tolls. He was not important. He was a sluice. If he could be convinced that the movement of money felt normal, much would pass beneath notice. Sorella had suggested a gift of information, segments of traffic patterns that would make the man feel like a seer when he guessed who would arrive late at a checkpoint, and why. Mon disliked manipulation. She liked wasting no one's courage more than she disliked manipulation. They found the man in a booth smelling of stale coffee, and someone's soft cologne from a different shift. He wore his tiredness like a badge. He looked at Tay like a bill come due and looked at Mon like an anomaly he could afford to ignore if he decided she was someone's aunt. "You should go home," he told Mon not unkindly. "The city is not a place for people who are used to being listened to." "I am used to being asked for favors," Mon said, "and then being judged for the way I give them. I would like to try something else." "Listen now." He blinked. The sentence had detached him from his expectations by a small, necessary degree. Tay laid the information on the counter as if it were cough drops. "You can anticipate 2 surges tonight. One from the stadium when they let them out early, because they have turned the game into a ceremony. One from the cheap cinema because the reels are broken and they won't admit it until the first half hour is done. If you shift the cones a little, no one will notice and no one will curse at you. The blessing of not being cursed at is worth something." The toll collector considered the paper as if it might conceal a blade. "If I do this," he said slowly, "you will ask me to do more. We will ask you to make your line a place where people breathe a little," Mon said. "We will ask you to notice if someone is being followed badly and cough. We will ask you to put a sticker on a box that says handled and let it pass without being handled, because the woman who carries it is tired and the thing inside it matters." He looked up at her with something like impatience. "You cannot run a city on poetry." "No," Mon said, "but you can survive one with it." She pushed the paper toward him. "Here is the prose." He laughed, despite himself, and folded the paper into his pocket, with the gesture of a man who keeps certain items close to his heart by habit. When they left, he did not say good luck. He said, "I will move the cones," and then, more casually, as if nothing mattered less, "I knew your father when he was rude to men who deserved it." The smallest grace of the day came from an old man on a bench, who had outlived his war, and did not intend to be impressed by a new one. He saw the starboard scraped on the side of a power box. Small, unapologetic, already scuffed by passers-by, and took a penknife from his pocket to sharpen its wing. He did it lazily, the way you straighten a picture frame. When he was done, he tucked the knife away and returned to watching the traffic. A boy across the way noticed, then someone behind him, then someone else. No one said anything, but the street moved a fraction more as if its joints had been oiled. As they walked, Tay's earpiece supplied the hum of a city's many throats. Sorella's letters returned with replies, scribbled and typed, and spoken into cheap recorders whose springs squeaked. Mon listened for Harm and also for Hope. Harm wore boots. Hope wore work shoes. A message from the freight union came in with the rhythm of a marching chant and the vocabulary of an invoice. "We can reroute pallets through Bay 12 3 nights a week. We can look the other way if 2 of the pallets are not on our manifest. We will never sign anything." "Fine," Tay said aloud. "Never sign anything. Make your lives easier that way. We will keep our ledgers with breadcrumbs." They reached the high-walled market that always smelled of frying and new cloth. The seller of tools rescued a box from under his counter and pushed it into Tay's hands without letting Tay protest. Inside were an assortment of items no one would think of as a plan: a spool of wire, a packet of charcoal, a jar of buttons with shanks intact, 2 small screwdrivers whose handles had lost their color. Tay held the box as if it were a child he'd been asked to mind for a minute. "We will keep things running," the seller said. And if they ask me why I sold you the wire, I will say I forgot you. My wife says this is my best trait. Mon bought nothing and placed money on the counter anyway. The man pushed it back, offended. She doubled it and pushed it under the jar of nails, the stall kept for extensions and emergency repairs. He saw her do it, frowned, and let it sit. Because husbands and wives fight differently when the subject is money, you did not want but might need. By evening, the city's appetite for rumor had eaten more than its fill. A man in a bar told another that Mon would speak in the theater. Someone else said the emperor would come himself to watch. Someone said the sky lanes would be shut, and everyone would be checked for their middle names. Someone else said that if you slept with a lemon under your pillow, you would wake safe. Sorella sent word to leave the rumors alone. Rumors fertilize themselves when tended. Better to water the facts and let rumor wither. In the apartment with the terrible curtains, the woman with the nails made stew and hummed. The tune was not Chandralan. It was not from any of the places Mon could place. It was the kind of tune that becomes a kind of nation. Lutha arrived with bread that had split down one side like a smile. Rel came with a spool of cable he had not borrowed, and would not return to its owner, because the owner was a room no one could find anymore. We can use the old museum line, he said, elbows on the table because good news has poor manners. They turned it off on paper. They never turned it off in the ground. If they did, the statues would sweat. The statues should not sweat, so the line is live. We'll have to talk like curators for the first 30 seconds, so the machine recognizes our voice. After that, it will carry anything with the right shape. What shape? Lutha asked. Neighbor, Rel said, grinning shyly. It likes the way the word sounds. They ate. Eating was the discipline that kept rhetoric honest. Mon had learned in the Senate that people who ignored their bodies built laws that ignored bodies too. She sopped stew with bread and listened to the city breathe. In the brief look down the hallway to the washroom, she saw a drawing pinned crookedly. The starboard. Uneven. Proud. The terrible curtains moved in a draft and did not improve. When she returned to the table, Sorella was there without being seen to arrive. Tay had given up hiding how pleased he was to be useful. We recorded replies today, Sorella said. From worlds you would not expect to care that the Senate exists. Not for your sake. She had no interest in formality. For their own, there was a voice on Jeddah, in one of the little schools that survived everything by calling itself something else. The teacher asked if she should hide the books with the wrong dates or leave them and teach the dates and the reason they are wrong. Leave them, Mon said at once. We will not build the habit of burning. Teach the reason. Teach always the reason. Medicine. There was a soldier, Sorella continued. On a ship you would not be allowed to say the name of even if you wanted to. A clone, I think. He said he had been listening since he was born and now he wanted to learn to hear. He asked what sound a neighbor makes. He asked if it is different from the sound of a brother. Mon set her spoon down with the care of someone handling glass. A neighbor is the sound of someone carrying something with you that they do not have to carry, she said. A brother is the sound a parent remembers. They can be the same. They do not have to be. You can choose either word. Neither word is a weapon unless you sharpen it. Nensao. And Andron sent a message, Tay said, glancing up to watch her face for the flinch that would test lore against memory. They wanted to remind us that their war did not end. It merely changed its name. They have people who know how to throw themselves at a problem and make the problem explode. They are willing. They asked for targets. The room tightened, not in fear but in care. There is a sound people make when they gather themselves not to be swayed by the satisfaction of a quick thing. Send them the list of clinics? Mon said. Tay looked up, startled. Have them defend clinics. Have them decide that the clean water lines are more important than a convoy. Have them make sure that if anyone tries to scare a midwife, that person finds their own door watched for a week. Have them become bored out of their minds recovering stolen textbooks from customs and returning them to shelves without being seen. And if they ask why, she added, hearing the stanza build itself, tell them the empire once used to practice cruelty because cruelty. We will not work that muscle. We will build others. Then one shatter. It will make them angry, Sorella said, not to counsel against it but to honor its cost. I know, Mon said. They are allowed to be angry. They are also allowed to be more useful than their anger would predict. In the soft hour before midnight, when the city gets sentimental and then frightened by its sentimentality, the knock came on a door 3 floors down and 2 to the right. The woman with the braided hair put her hand flat on her table, and Toby, the cat who had been asleep on a chair since the last empire, opened one eye, decided not to die tonight, and closed it again. The door belonged to a retired flight controller, who had never lost a landing and wore that fact like a medal in the privacy of his mind. He opened because he had not yet learned how not to. The officers on the step were polite and bored, because polite boredom had been written into their training as a weapon against panic. Looking for a woman, the taller one said. Small, red hair, without an appointment. Bender and I. Everyone in this building is without an appointment, the flight controller said, a statement of urban principle. No one lives here who plans their life that far in advance. They searched anyway, neutrally, as men do when they have a job and no hunger to do it badly. They checked for the wrong things. They checked under beds for Mon and did not check behind books for letters. On the way out, the younger one patted the cat automatically and then blushed as if he'd compromised a posture. The older one knocked his knuckles on the banister and listened to the tone, and for a second, Mon loved him for it. A man who listens to the tone of banisters will betray his orders for the right music. They left. The woman with the nails let her breath make a shape again. Rel drew the starboard and did not erase it this time. Someone might need the reminder on the way to work. They slept in shifts. The city did not sleep at all. It consolidated. In the morning, news arrived the way news does when it carries its own weather. The emperor had announced a commission to study the efficiency of the Senate with an eye to, Massa Meta's word, rounded, sensible modernization. The word fell like furniture being moved upstairs, a thump 1 floor removed from your day, but still a weight. A picture of Mon was placed beside the word modernization, and the caption called her a symptom, which made people on construction sites snort because symptoms belonged to bodies and bodies always had reasons. Bale sent a message with nothing in it except the word patience, and then, on the next line, the word bread. He had decided to be judicious. Mon decided to be literal. She went with Lutha to the bakery, because flour was a policy, and ovens were where you measured whether your promises could rise. In the heat, she forgot that she had once been afraid of wasting her hands on anything without a microphone. Kneading was an argument that did not require words. The dough behaved as if the world might be predictable if you did simple things well enough and long enough. A woman came in with 2 children who were trying very hard not to touch anything. She bought a loaf and broke off the heel for them immediately because hunger does not war with discipline, it instructs it. She looked at Mon and did not say her name. She said, "You made my building quieter. We had an argument in the stairwell yesterday. It was very loud. No one hit anyone. I am not sure I like your rebellion. It is inconvenient. But the stairwell was better." "That is the right complaint," Mon said, trying not to cry into the flour. "Inconvenience is the sound of change in the right places. Men with guns are the sound of change in the wrong places," the woman said. "Sometimes," Mon said. "Sometimes they're the sound of men with guns." "True," the woman said, and her children stopped trying not to touch things and reached for the bread and touched it like a holy thing, and then giggled because holiness that tastes good is the best kind. By noon, an official communique forbade the sale of foodstuffs without a license. It read like a law. It behaved like a test. Lutha tore her license in half and taped it back together and hung it skewed so that any inspector would feel superior and acknowledge that superiority by granting mercy. 3 inspectors came. All 3 tried to be exactly the right mixture of officious and human, which meant 2 were too officious and 1 was too human. Lutha sent them away with rolls and a lecture about proofing times that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with the dignity of yeast. Mon watched one man's ear turn red and realized he would remember that lecture when he had to choose between confiscate and ignore later in the week. In the afternoon, the first letter came from Naboo. It was precise and hesitant, and the handwriting was a small curl that had learned to be beautiful by hardship. The queen wrote not in the voice of a monarch, but of a steward, as Naboo rulers tend to. We remember the day a senator died on our world, and the way the day after tasted. We remember parades and the cost of making them too orderly. We remember a promise of quiet. We have students who are learning to grow food well. We have artists who are learning to carve without permission again. We have a river that wants to be something more than a reflection of the palace. We are not ready to declare rebellion. We are ready to declare attention. Attention is a discipline, Mon said aloud when she finished. We will treat it as such. She wrote back with care and sent not demands but a syllabus. 3 things a quiet world could do that would make enormous noise when the time came. It was the old craft of legislative whip counting transformed into garden plans. Toward evening, a boy with too clean a haircut arrived with a basket of vegetables and a message that was not written down. He could not have been more than 16. He stood the way soldiers learned to stand because someone had taught him to stand that way in school. He addressed Mon as Mom, his voice a fraction too deep because he had lowered it to match the cut of his hair. He looked at the floor when he spoke. He looked up when he said the word mother. She is afraid, he said. She is always afraid. She told me to bring you this because fear is easier when you are holding something. She told me to tell you that the man who knocks at our door to ask after our ration card has a face that tries to be ashamed and fails. She told me to tell you that if you ask people to do small things, please make the small things matter. They will, Mon said. Tell your mother that the starboard is small and is drawing flight from every wall that carries it. He nodded as if she had given him an instruction about homework. He lingered. Boys always linger when the room is full of women doing the work that keeps a city from breaking when it turns. He picked up the jar of buttons and turned it like a snow globe. Why buttons? He asked nobody. To keep us from unraveling. Sorella said, fierce and absent-minded. Fingers flying across a panel that had no right to perform as well as it did. Some of us are threadbare. We need all the help available. Then, there is a point in any campaign where the public face becomes an instrument, and you must tune it or crack it. That night, they tuned it. Mon recorded a message for the hull on its smallest pipes, a visual for those who needed to see skin as well as hear a sentence. She did not wear her Senate clothing. She did not wear anything that tried to make a case for her wealth or her modesty. She wore the shawl the woman with the curtains had handed her, and the eyes she had earned by accepting that the empire had not stolen her voice, only the room in which it had been accustomed to echo. She looked into the lens as if it were a neighbor's face and said, "We are not starting a war. The war exists. It is being waged every morning on small things and ordinary lives. We are starting an insistence. It will look like kitchens. It will look like clinics. It will look like learning the names of people on your street. If soldiers come to frighten you, ask their names too. People who are called by their names remember what they are called to." The feed clung to the museum line for 71 seconds before the machines remembered their orders. It was enough for a boy in a sub-school on Lothal to copy the Starbird into the corner of his notes and for a girl on Braca to say neighbor to her father and watch his face learn the word. It was enough for a clone trooper on a transport, CT 8104, to write in his hand a curve that could have been the start of a wing, and then stop, embarrassed by tenderness, and tuck the scrap of paper under the plate on his chest. The city gave back stories because it had nowhere else to put them. A woman who mended umbrellas told Sorella that she would mend anything with a handle for free if it belonged to someone who carried books. A man who kept pigeons on a roof that was illegal to be on said he would teach children how to hold their breath from joy instead of fear. Someone spray-painted, "Breathe together," on the side of a municipal bus in letters that were too tall to ignore. The city painted over it in beige. The next morning, the words were there again. Lower. under the line of the windows where you'd see them, if you let your eyes travel down to the level of someone sitting with their hands in their lap. The first raid that was meant for Mon took a building instead, and found a cat. The officers lifted chairs as if chairs might breathe secrets, tipped drawers as if paper would confess, asked neighbors questions with the polite boring tone they had been given, and left with 2 sacks of confiscated stew that would be quietly eaten that night in a barracks with shame disguised as hunger. When they were gone, the street put itself back in order. Men who had stood with their hands in their pockets took their hands out and put them to work. A girl who had been crying in an armchair under the terrible curtains stopped and laughed because someone outside had dropped a pan. The sound of the pan was rebellion, unintended, low, proud. 2 days later, Tarataniel was released to home confinement by a bureaucrat who had just received a letter from his mother in which she declared, in unstudied innocence, that the price of onions was a scandal and that she had heard the senator from Chandrila liked them too, and that someone should do something. The bureaucrat's mother had met Mon once in a market and had formed a permanent and entirely accurate impression that this was a woman you could ask to fix the price of onions. Tarataniel walked the edge of his apartment like a caged animal, and then sat by the window and watched the city practice ordinary courage. He called Mon and said nothing. They sat in silence, letting friendship be a verb. Bale sent word that the Commission on Modernization had convened and adjourned within an hour, having decided to postpone its findings until a more congenial political weather prevailed. He wrote with the dryness she had loved when they were young, and thought the Republic could be rescued by mockery. The Emperor had smiled with his lips but not his teeth. Masameda had held the staff as if it were heavier than marble. Senators had folded their faces into arrangements that would allow them to survive a photograph. Mon did not return to the chamber. She recorded a message for the clerk she did not know, thanking her for filing what should not have been filed. She sent flowers to the clerk's home anonymously, and the clerk did not let the flowers into the house because she had a baby, and the baby had an allergy, and also because she had a husband who would ask questions. She put the flowers on the landing. Everyone who passed admired them, and none of them asked who had done what for whom. The flowers did their work anyway. The first time Mon left the city after the declaration was not under the drama of night, but under the drama of supply. A convoy of agricultural equipment bound for a world whose governor liked to call himself pastoral in his speeches needed to be accompanied by a public figure to prove the empire's benevolence. A senator could not be found who would not say something like benevolence into a microphone. The bureaucracy, monstrous and merciful in its laziness, picked the file of a lesser official whose hair and height would read as a person. Mon borrowed the file by the old trick of asking a question at the right moment in a room full of men who hated questions. She rode in an open shuttle between crates of cedars and spades and crates that said utensils in a hand that reminded her of her father's, and knew there would be a point on the route where a choice could be made. It came in a gorge where the transponders always flickered, and the pilots always assumed the fault lay with the rock, and not with a woman who knew how a city's bones altered an empire's arteries. The shuttle dipped. The sky tilted. The escort's chatter went staticky enough to be useless and clean enough to be plausible. Mon looked at the pilot, a man whose face had been chosen for its forgettableness, and the man nodded. He hadn't been asked to be brave. He had been asked to keep an appointment with a river. They sat down on a strip of ground that had been used for practice landings by students with more nerve than experience. Men and women in orange vests moved without looking urgent because urgency was a tell. They transferred 2 crates that weighed nothing and everything to a truck that had a smear of mud exactly where such a smear would be expected. Mon stepped into the truck as if she had always ridden in trucks. They drove to a warehouse that smelled of iron and apples. Inside, a group of people who had taken all the names the Empire had thrown at them and ground them into compost for courage waited. They were the farmers and the repairers, the men and women who had kept small worlds together while big men broke them. Neighbors, Mon said, and some of them smiled, and some of them frowned because the word had not yet earned trust in their mouths. I will not ask you to declare rebellion, she said. You declared the habit of living. I ask you to continue. And when they come to ask you to sign your water over, I ask you to refuse in ways that are unimaginative and effective. Be pedantic. Be infuriating. Make them bring the wrong wrench to the right pipe. Make them fill out the wrong form, and then the right one, and then wait. The Empire has armies. We have time. Now. A woman who had not smiled said, "Time is a luxury." "Nomo," Mon said. "Time is the resource of the poor, and we will spend it like billionaires spend money." Something like a laugh went through the room, grudging and bright. A man with hands like plowed fields lifted a crate, marked utensils, and took out not utensils, but books. He had saved them from a school that had been turned into a training facility for obedience. He had kept them dry. He had not read them yet because his daughter should read them first. He gave them to Mon as if he were giving away fire. She took them in the same way and gave them back immediately to the teacher standing beside him, because ownership was the Empire's trick. Guardianship was theirs. On the way back to Coruscant, the shuttle flew over a swath of water cut with traffic and light. Mon watched the water and thought of the river that had run under the city since before the first Senate disc was poured. She thought of the maintenance man who loved old water and his wife Stu, and the boy with the hair and the cat who refused to be dramatic. She thought of Bail, surrounded by civility like armor. She thought of the Emperor, surrounded by senators like candles, one gust away from dark, though you could not see the wind yet. She thought of the clone who had drawn a wing and hidden it. She thought of the word neighbor, and how it had moved from a sentence to a promise to a structure on which you could hang a day. When she stepped off the shuttle into the disguised routine of inspection, she saw across the traffic and the uniforms a face she recognized without knowing the name. The man held himself like a person accustomed to being listened to by people who did not agree with him. His clothes were perfect and nondescript. He did not look at her too long. He had the air of someone who collects information as a hobby and principles as an indulgence. He nodded the kind of nod you give to a plan you are not sure you approve of yet, but admire for its draftsmanship. "Friends?" Tay asked later when she described him. "Not yet," Mon said. "Not enemies either. The city is full of people who find meaning by approaching it sideways." "Sideways is useful," Tay said, "if you remember which way you meant to be going." The day they almost took her did not smell of copper. It smelled of rain coming and then failing to arrive. She was in a stairwell with a package of fuses under her shawl, because the clinic needed light, and someone in procurement had decided that light was a privilege of the compliant. Footsteps came up behind and then slowed because the footsteps had recognized that too fast footsteps in a stairwell say that you are not a neighbor. Mon stepped aside for a woman with a toddler on her hip, and 2 bags of laundry dragging behind. The woman gave her the small nod of a city conspirator, the one that means I see you, and I will never say so out loud. At the landing, the officers met a man trying to carry a chair and a cello at the same time, which is a thing that defeats dignity. They helped him because no one had told them not to, and he thanked them profusely, and then swore at the stair for being invented by sadists, and by the time they looked up, Mon had reached a door where the number had been written in chalk, and the chalk had been smudged just enough. Inside, Sorella had the museum line humming as if it were a stove. Lutha had flour on her forehead. Tay had lost his patience with a pencil. Rel had found a diode. The city had not lost her. When night finally wore itself thin enough for the next morning to stick its fingers through, Mon stood by the window with the terrible curtains and watched Coruscant put on its work face. Buses complained and kept going. Children fussed and were bribed. Somewhere not far away, a man was practicing his trumpet and not getting better. Somewhere far away enough to hear as a kind of weather, a ship left atmosphere with the precise arrogance of machines designed for leaving. She thought of the Declaration, which had felt like a stone thrown into a lake, and had revealed itself to be a seed in a plowed field. The field was huge. It wanted rain. It would accept many hands. "We will need councils," Tay said behind her, his voice careful with other people's duty. "Not the Senate. Dry rooms and chairs that don't match. People with pens. A place where anyone can bring a list and leave with a task. We will call them kitchens," Lutha said, and Mon smiled into the glass. "Call them whatever the building allows," Sorella said. "Some of them will be workshops. Some will be clinics. Some will be stairwells where a neighbor keeps a broom. If you insist on words, I will insist on wiring." "Nah. We will need money," Tay said. "We will need favors," Mon said. And we will pay them forward. Money is loud. Favors are dull. Dull is our color. Rel tapped the window with his knuckle and made a sound like rain. We will need patience, he said. We have bread, Luther said. Patience is simply bread turned into time. The morning's message from Alderaan contained nothing but a recipe for soup and a quotation from a poem that had been published anonymously during a previous occupation and attributed to a dead uncle and a librarian and a girl with a ribbon in her hair. The poem's last line was not lofty. It was, "Hold hands before doors." Mon read it aloud, and the room was silent in that way. Rooms are when someone has said a thing that cures an ache. When soldiers came again, not for Mon precisely, but for someone in her path, they came with new language. Traitor had entered the mouth of the officer in charge, and it sat there awkwardly because it made his tongue thick. He said it once. He did not say it twice. A woman in a window shouted down that she had known the person they were taking as a child, that he had been a thief even then, that he had stolen pears and a bicycle, and now he was stealing the Empire's patience. She was teasing the soldiers. They did not know. They wrote it down as something useful and left with their prize. Everyone watching learned something about the speed of stupidity and the way you could survive it by giving it sugar. In the days that followed, the starbird appeared where you would not think to look for it. Edged into the corner of a bread receipt, chalked inches above floor level in the corner where a cleaner's mop would never reach. Stitched in pale thread under the hem of a child's dress, by a grandmother who pretended to have poor eyesight when anyone asked what she was doing. The Empire noticed that something was being carried and could not measure it. Men who had measured everything all their lives grew irritated. Irritation made them clumsy. Clumsiness opened doors. On a morning that would later be called the day the kitchens met, 6 neighborhoods held 6 gatherings that were remarkably alike without anyone arranging sameness. There was tea. There was a list. There was someone who kept time. There was a chair that every person over 60 refused because they had stood for harder hours. There were 3 decisions at each table. One about safety, one about food, one about words. Safety. A sign that could be scratched on a door to mean quietly, someone is sick. A different sign for quietly, someone is being watched. Food. A rotation of who took whose leftovers when leftovers were a sin. Words. A phrase to answer the men with the questions so that the questioners would write down something and leave, and the words would not betray anyone. The phrase was different in each place. In one set of kitchens it was, "I'm sure you're right." In another, "The pipes have been noisy. Do you hear it?" In another, "Have you met our cat?" Mon did not preside. She circulated. It was another discipline of leadership to become legion without letting the idea of yourself cause a traffic jam. At one table, a woman grabbed her hand and would not let go until the tea had cooled. "I was taught to mind my business," the woman said. "I did it so well I forgot I had a business. You reminded me." At another, a young man with anger around him like weather asked for a target again and looked like he might walk away if he did not get one with a roof and a lock to break. Mon gave him a book list instead, and when he glared she said, "If you think breaking a lock is harder than finding a book banned last week, you have never loved a librarian. Bring me 3 copies by dawn, and I will give you a door to open that saves a life." He returned at dawn with 2 books, and a story about a third that had been read to him by a woman who could not let it go. He cried in the telling, and was embarrassed by his tears. She did not comfort him. She gave him the address of a door and a code to open it, in which every number was the date of a birth. After the kitchens, after the poems, after the bread ran out and was made again, after the clinic saw a wound that had been made with a baton and treated it with salt and kindness, after a soldier returned with a bag of stew and shame that he would not give a name to and left with a list of people to look away from at noon, after the boy with the hair cut too clean learned to carry the basket without looking like a messenger, after Sorel's machines learned to hum under a river under another building, after Tay discovered that dullness could be conducted like electricity, after Bale's patients taught his aides how to walk slower down corridors, after Alderaan's soup recipe taught a city to trust the handwriting of the decent, after Naboo's attention hardened into resolve, After the old man sharpened the wing of the bird again because someone had scuffed it. After the terrible curtain swayed and refused to become beautiful. After all that came on the door. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The city had learned to hear small sounds. The woman with the nails looked at Mon, and then at the cat, and then at the jar that had fewer nails than when Mon arrived. She pressed one into Mon's hand. Mon did not know why it felt like a ceremony. It did. Tay touched his earpiece and did not change color. Lutha wiped her hands and said quietly to no one and to everyone, "Oven's off." Sorella picked up a coil of wire and made herself look busy with the wrong thing, because the right thing attracts attention. Rel moved to the window and drew, in the condensation, a wing that evaporated as he drew it. Mon opened the door because that is what neighbors do. The officers outside were the ones with the polite boredom removed. Behind them stood a man with a face that had been trained not to show that it enjoyed its work. Imperial security had many faces. This one had chosen cruelty that whispered instead of shouted. He looked past Mon into the room and saw curtains and flour and wire and a cat. It disappointed him. He liked drama. "Senator Mothma," he said. He did not say neighbor. "You will come with us." "By whose statute?" she asked. "Because repetition matters." He had prepared for that. "By the authority vested in the Commission for Public Order by His Excellency in session this morning." "You act quickly," Mon said. "I respect speed. It is rarely accompanied by thought." He looked at her as if she were a kitten trying to scratch his glove. "You will come with us now." Lutha would have thrown flour. Sorella would have thrown wire. Rel would have panicked. Tay would have argued in a way that made men feel they'd made a mistake, even when they hadn't. Mon did none of those. She turned her head, took in the people in the room she loved, and nodded. She put the nail into her pocket as if securing a jewel. She stepped forward and closed the door carefully behind her, as if not to let the stew smell out. On the landing, an old woman with a basin waited, because she always waited to wash the hallway in the morning. She looked at the officers. She looked at Manda. She lifted the basin with difficulty, and then set it down again loudly, so that the water sloshed and crackled, and smelled of soap. It seemed like nothing. It was a signal. The floor below took up its own basin and set it down. The floor above did the same. The stairwell echoed with domestic thunder. The building declared that it was awake. The officer with the careful face did not flinch. He had been trained. He gestured, and two of his men stepped forward. Mon went. They took her down the stairs in a choreography that attempted to be inhuman, and failed, because stairs make people clumsy. A neighbor dropped a spoon. Another coughed at the wrong time. A child asked, "Is that the woman who says neighbors?" and was shushed gently because we do not teach children to be quiet, we teach them when to be. At the bottom, in the vestibule that smelled of wet coats and ambitions, a man leaned against a radiator with a book open and a pencil behind his ear. He was not reading. He was waiting to nod at a woman he'd never met. He nodded. Mon nodded back. Outside, the rain the day had promised had not arrived. The air had the taste of it anyway. The street made itself into an aisle and watched as if a wedding were taking place, and the wrong bride had come. There were no shouts. There were no thrown bottles. The quiet was not fear. It was the weighing of what to do in the next minute, in the next. The starboard appeared in the corner of a shop window. Chalked small. A boy across the street stood a little taller. A woman pulled a child close, not to hide its eyes, but to let the child feel her heartbeat and memorize its tempo. They put Mon in a vehicle so dull that it was almost kind. The seats had been upholstered in a fabric chosen to be forgettable. The door made a sound designed not to carry. The officer with a perfectly controlled face sat across from her and folded his hands as if beginning a consultation. The vehicle moved with the exact competence of a city used to carrying away people it intended to return or not. The rain still did not come. It waited. "Senator," the officer said, "I admire efficiency. You have caused me work." "Good," Mon said. "Work has dignity." "You mistake me," he said, which was his profession. "You are an inconvenience that will be corrected. The empire is very large. It can afford patience and a certain amount of mess. We are small, Mon said. We can afford attention. Attention will not protect you. It will make me worth more than a warning. He tilted his head, which in a different man would have been curiosity, and in this one was an adjustment of aim. You use the word neighbor in the Senate. Do you think the word will stand against necessity? I think you do not understand necessity, Mon said. You think it is a weapon. It is an herb. It seasons what people were going to do anyway. Then? He looked at her for a long moment, then leaned forward. Tell me who writes your messages. Neighbors, Mon said, and smiled at him in a way she had practiced for years when men wanted her to perform fear politely so they could be magnanimous. They took her not to the Senate holding cell, which had too much legality and too many cameras, but to a building that had once been used for licensing street musicians and now licensed something else entirely. The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner, which was the Empire's idea of innocence. The room had a table bolted to the floor and a chair that would wobble just enough to bother the dignity of the person sitting in it. She sat anyway and put her hands flat where she could see them and think about what hands are for. They asked questions in the order men who liked to be obeyed asked questions. Small trap, big trap, a sweetness to lead you to the third trap that made you want to show how well you avoided the first two. Mon answered, with the patience of a person who knows that time is the resource of the poor. She gave them exactly as much as would satisfy a file without feeding a hunger. She told them that she had always preferred tea to coffee. She told them that Chandrila had fields that looked like work even when no one was in them. She told them that bread was improved by air. She did not tell them who kept the doors, or where the wires ran, or why the cat had tolerated her. The officer with the careful face leaned in until she could see the hairline crack in one of his incisors. It made him interesting, which annoyed him. Senator Mothma, he said, as if they had shared a childhood, you will hurt people if you continue. People you pretend to care about. I do not pretend, Mon said. And I am not continuing. I am beginning. You are the one continuing. It is not a good look on you. He sat back and smiled without showing the crack again. Do you know, he said, what truly frightens me? Nothing, Mon said. That is your flaw. He blinked. He had not expected to be told his flaw. I fear boredom, he said softly. I fear a world where no one surprises me. That world has a name. Its name is order. Mentor. Then you should come to the kitchens, Mon said. We surprise ourselves hourly. They kept her for the exact number of hours, meant to make the morning's meetings inconvenient and the afternoon's errands impossible. They let her go before night, because night arrests send the wrong message. They released her with a document that had to be signed not by her, but by a neighbor who agreed to watch her. The Empire loved to turn neighbors into abbreviations. The woman with the nails came to the desk and took the pen and wrote her name in letters that refused to stay inside the lines. She will report to you every morning, the clerk said. Bored, efficient, dangerous like a clean blade. She reports to the bread, the woman said. And to the clinic, and to the river. The clerk looked at her without interest and stamped a paper with a satisfying thump. The stamp left a star-shaped smudge of ink where the rubber had worn oddly. The woman smiled at it. The clerk did not notice. Outside, the rain finally came. It came softly, with the reluctance of someone entering a room where they do not know the jokes. It dampened the chalk and did not erase the bird. It made the city smell like itself. It made the morning stew that had been saved for evening taste like something that would keep a person alive. People on balconies lifted their faces and let the drops hit their mouths, because children teach this habit and adults pretend not to know it. Mon walked under her shawl with her neighbor beside her, the ridiculous nail heavy in her pocket. Tay and Sorella and Lutha and Rel were waiting in a room with a curtain and a cat and a kettle and a laugh that had been set aside for when it was safe to use. The city made a sound like a man in a bar saying, "I'll get this one." A shuttle lifted. A tram groaned. A child declared the rain tasted of metal and victory. Somewhere, a clone trooper put his hand over the scrap of paper under his chest plate and did not know whether to feel brave or simply human. Somewhere, Bale read a letter, and did not show his hands shaking to anyone. Somewhere, the emperor looked out of a window at a city he believed he owned, and mistook the rain for weather. Mon stood in the doorway, and watched the water cross the street in narrow rills that learned each other quickly. "We will keep going," she said, not to make a statement, but to ensure the sentence continued to exist in the world. "We will keep going," Luther repeated, "because bread is speech. We will keep going." Sorella said, "Because wire is speech." "We will keep going," Tay said, "because lists are speech." Rel drew the bird on the fogged window with tender insistence, and did not rub it away. He stepped back, and the wing was imperfect. It did not matter. It was the right size for the hand of a child passing by to finish it. And in the street, a child did, tracing the curve with a finger, drawing the last line that made it fly.